we are up to chapter 19. Now that we spoke about tequila tonight and other important things, we're going to start with chapter 19. Exactly. Page 219, chapter 19. What Chochmah feels like, the defining property of dormant love. Last week, we spoke about the notion of dormant love, that every Jew, last class. Okay. For me, it was like last week, about a month ago. I don't know, somewhere before my kids got married. It's been a while, but we're back. Okay. So the last class, we discussed the notion of dormant love, that every Jewish person has a dormant love to God within them, irrespective of their practices, beliefs, what have you. Part of your spiritual DNA, you can't get rid of it. The question is, what does it do? How does it get awakened? And to some degree, why is it dormant? I mean, what is this notion of having a dormant love to God? And yes, 219, page 19. Yeah, at the bottom of the page. So, yeah, chapter 19 as well. So what we're going to discuss are 4 questions that was posed in the last chapter, which are A, the root of this love; B, its defining property; C, what is our inheritance; D, why it includes also an inherited capacity for reverence. In other words, what, typically speaking, love and reverence are 2 very different emotions, right? Love and fear, or reverence, what have you. How is reverence included within love? We say that every Jew has dormant love, but yet at the same time in the chapter we mentioned that within that there's reverence. How does reverence come into play with that of love? Page 220, chapter 19. So, to elucidate further the idea of dormant love, which is present in our souls, we first have to clarify the verse, Adam's soul is God's candle. Okay, from the book of Proverbs. What does that mean? It means that the souls of Israel, which are referred to as Adam, as the Gemara says, are comparable to the flame of a candle, which by nature continually flickers upwards, right? So if you look at a flame is always going upwards. Flames don't naturally go downwards. So, and it's constantly flickering, typically speaking. It looks like almost like the flame wants to jump off the wick. Why is that the case? Why is that different than other things? Why doesn't, I mean, other things don't seem to flicker or have that same property? Because a fire's flame is naturally inclined to detach itself from the wick. So as to connect with its root above in the core element of fire, which is below the moon's orbit. So I explained it over here, but in short, okay, in the classical model, the universe is divided into 2 parts. One is the terrestrial region, down here, excuse me, which includes Earth and everything surrounding it, up to the moon's orbit. Okay, and then the celestial region, which accounts for everything beyond the moon's orbit. What does that mean? So everything in, sorry?
It's interesting because the moon is part of the Earth. It circles around the Earth. So
well, everything.
That's why
okay, so according to, well, it depends whether things are egocentric or heliocentric, depending on how you look at things scientifically. But basically, according to Torah, by and large, most everybody says that the everything orbits around the Earth. Bottom line is it's egocentric. Science for many years believed that. I think it was until Galileo, if I remember correctly. Yeah. At which point he came up with this notion that things are heliocentric, that we go around the sun, etc. But be it as it may, according to the classical understanding here, there are 2 different regions, if you will. One is the terrestrial, down here, up until the moon's orbit, and second one above that, known as the celestial. What does that mean? There are 4 elements from which the Earth was created, correct? What are they? Earth?
Fire.
You know the song or the band.
But there's no wind. It's water.
Oh, it's air. Wind, same idea. Okay, you know where they got it from. Okay, so 3 of those, by nature, tried to attach themselves to their core. What is their core? The center of the Earth, which would be water. Water doesn't naturally go upwards. No. Earth, dirt also stays down. And the same thing applies to that of air. In other words, it stays lower down here because it's trying to connect itself to its source. Its source, or its sources, are sort of the center of the planet. Now, obviously, it can only go down so far, but ultimately, that's what it's trying to do. Fire's source, spiritual source, that is, ultimately, is beneath the moon, in that orbit up there. And therefore, the nature of fire is to constantly strive or yearn to go upward, to flicker. to want to go up.
The moon. How,
And to that's as he says, it's beneath, it's the higher terrestrial realm beneath the moon's orbit. So, which explains what, because it's anything that's even fire is part of the terrestrial world for all intents and purposes. But nonetheless, its source is right there, right beneath the moon's orbit. That's much higher up, so therefore, by nature, it goes up. Wants to return to its source, which is why a flame flickers and constantly is going upwards. So, which goes to Eitz Chaim is brought down in Kabbalah and Eitz Chaim. This is the spiritual reasoning. So, and he writes here on page 221, the classical model was embraced by the sages. It was employed extensively by Jewish medieval philosophers. Here, the Tanya notes that this model was also used by Lurianic Kabbalah, Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as Arizal, from 500 years ago, roughly. Even though by leaving its wick and uniting with its source of flame is going to be extinguished, right? It's going to cease to shine it all down here. If a flame jumps off its wick, it's going to go out. And even once it's reabsorbed in its source, let's say for argument's sake, it did jump off and it went back to its source. Are you going to notice the wick in its source? Notice the flame in its source? Not at all. It's going to be completely consumed or subsumed within the source of fire above. But nonetheless, the nature of the flames to want to do that anyway. It's counterintuitive. In other words, if you want to exist as an independent entity, you don't want, in a sense, leave your entity, your independence. Otherwise, you're just part of a huge conglomerate that has no identity whatsoever, which essentially is what's happening to that flame wanting to go up to its source. Now, this is a mashal. This is used as a parable to that of the soul. Kach neshamas adam, or midway down 221. In the same way, a person's higher soul power of neshama, and then the lower ones of the powers of ruach and nefesh, the lower levels of the soul. Naturally, they yearn and desire to be separated from the body and to leave it. Soul doesn't want to be down here. It wants to reattach itself to its source. It wants to attach itself to Hashem in heaven, not deal with all the chazarai going on in this world. So as to attach themselves with the soul's root and source in God, the giver of life may be blessed. So intuiting its source in God to be a superior level of existence and bodily incarnation, the soul naturally desires it. Agam shi'tiya ayim v'efes. Titzkabato sham b'mitzios l'gamre. Leisham imenu mu'uma imos v'asmus arisha b'chein zer v'sein v'chefsa b'tiva. So even though if the soul was to leave the body, for argument's sake, right, and it returns to its source, what's its source? God himself. Once it goes back to its source, it no longer has an identity as the soul of that person or something. It's just as part of this huge godly entity, if you will. But that's the desire of the soul. It's like that of the flame that desires to return to its source. Where if it did, and it jumps off the wick, so to speak, and goes back to its source of fire beneath the orbit of the moon, it would no longer be identified as anything in particular. It's just going to get subsumed into the source of fire, like the soul will be subsumed into the source of it, which is that of Hashem.
This reminds me of that parable. I just vaguely remember it, of the rabbis in the garden, and one of them is warm.
Akiva is the only one who went in safely and came out in peace.
The other ones,
one died, one went crazy, one became a heretic.
One connected with God.
He died. His soul left him.
Yeah, his soul left.
It says it's brought down from the Gemara. It says Abba Nichnos LaPardes. 4 entered the Pardes. The Pardes is translated loosely as the Garden of Eden. It doesn't mean physically they walked into the Garden of Eden. It's not like there's an entrance someplace. Like on Google Maps, you'll find the Garden of Eden. It means that they attach themselves to a very deep spiritual level, which allowed them to appreciate otherwise, appreciate godly revelations that otherwise are not available to mankind. Right. So their souls ascended to this place. So one of them died, his soul left him because it was such a godly experience. He didn't want to go back, soul didn't want to go back into a physical body. One became a heretic and one went crazy was too much. The only one who went in peace and left in peace was Rabbi Akiva. Because he understood that this is a great godly experience, but he also understood that he had a purpose of existence in the physical world, and the soul has to come back to the physical world. Remotely, yes, because ultimately,
Now to me, it would be young.
yeah, but there's, even though they say don't study Kabbalah till you're 40, that's the magical age. But it doesn't mean that once a person becomes 40 years old, they should just start studying Kabbalah. Realistically, just over 40. But it means essentially, first and foremost, to understand Kabbalah properly, you need to have a foundation in Torah in general. Hitting 40 automatically doesn't give you a foundation in Torah. What it does give you is you're more of a level-headed person. You have, according to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, it says that the age of 40, you reach a level of understanding. That on a more comprehensive level, you understand things on a different level. But still, in all, to understand Kabbalah properly, one has to have spent a fair amount of time, okay, studying other parts of Torah, the exoteric, the revealed parts of Torah, before you get into the esoteric, as intriguing as it may be. Because if a person doesn't, yes, there are people that go crazy just studying Kabbalah, because it's like taking a psychedelic drug, but you don't necessarily just come down and go back to normal. You know what I mean? So there are people who have not. No, that's true. And I met a guy, I'll just tell you a very quick story. And Juneau, Alaska? I think it was Juneau, Alaska, if I remember correctly. I was there in the summer, was part of the Chabad, the Peace Corps movement, if you will. And the man was living in Juneau, Alaska. I had met him the summer before. I went there for 2 summers to Alaska in general. And we asked him to put on tefillin. He said, no problem. He wants to put on tefillin in the park. It was like a little central park, about a half a block from his office. No problem. I don't care. I want to put him inside. Most people want to put it in their office behind closed doors. No one should know. He wanted to put it on in the park. Fine. No, we go to the park. This is the second summer. He puts on tefillin. He says, by the way, I have great news. What was the great news? That he had come back more recently from Philadelphia. He had gone to study with Rabbi Berg, who's the founder of the Kabbalah Center. Okay, not the best way to go for study Kabbalah. And he tells me, this is a man, incidentally, by the way, who was at the time intermarried, keeps next to nothing Jewish-wise. I mean, kosher, nothing. Okay? But he says, I meditate on the Tetragrammaton for an hour a day now. This is what he learned how to do in the Kabbalah Center. I'm thinking, it's great, but there's so much to do before you get to this level of meditating on Tetragrammaton. This is like playing with fire, okay? So it's feel good Kabbalah, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if he sits in a yoga position and goes, I have no idea. There's nothing wrong with meditation, but to be able to truly meditate on God's name properly, it requires an extensive amount of study to understand what it even is. It's not just a matter of mumbling some mantra, or I'm not sure what they taught him, but didn't teach him. It's not the way to go. That's my point is. So yes, one can study Kabbalah, but again, it comes with the premise of it's like building a beautiful palace, which is the Kabbalah, without a foundation. Your foundation may not be fancy, right? Often the foundation is under the ground. I mean, you want a big building, you have to have a very strong, healthy foundation, but it's not pretty, but it's what holds up everything above it. So the Kabbalah could be this beautiful palace, and perhaps some of the other parts of Judaism in some people's minds are lacking that beauty. It's not as exciting as Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. You got that buzzword, we're going to become mystics. But if you're missing that foundation, it's like a house of cards at a time, so it's going to come down.
But Kabbalah comes out of Judaism, so it comes out of everything that we study.
100%, but you need to consciously study other parts of Torah first, and then you will understand, you begin to appreciate the Kabbalistic insights. They're all part of Torah.
I can appreciate, I mean, we're all here to appreciate them.
You do, but this is based, a lot of this is based on Kabbalah, but it requires some form of explanation, some building. It's not like reading a novel. You know what I mean? Where you learn about 10 spiritual worlds and this and that. What?
Just look at the Torah. Just don't know what it means. Just look at the Hebrew, because it's good for you.
Okay, so they have a slightly different approach to life. I mean,
What happened?
nothing. You put on tefillin. He told me about it. I don't know, but this is a story from 35 years ago.
It sounds like he's in a dangerous place.
I don't know that he's in a dangerous place. My point is, though, that when you approach Kabbalah as a sort of this feel-good, happy-dippy, whatever, that's not the way. That's not the way to study Kabbalah, because it's not real. If you can put on a red string, drink Kabbalah water. I don't know, whatever they give you over there. They do. They sell Kabbalah water. I mean, it's a business.
You don't really have.
I know I'm being recorded, but what the heck? It's true. They do. They sell Kabbalah water. What's Kabbalah water? You slap a label on it that says Kabbalah water. It's the same water you buy anywhere else. Okay. It's full of non-Jews, number one. But beyond the fact that it's full of non-Jews, you don't have to do anything. It doesn't, to be a true Kabbalist, if you will, takes a tremendous amount of work and discipline. This doesn't take a lot of work. I just
It's a
go, you can
pathway to
scan,
becoming a
okay, you don't have to know how to read. You can scan your fingers over the letters, and somehow the letters come into your fingers. It's all feel-good stuff, which ultimately is shallow, and then down the road is empty.
Like the celebrity care about that rabbi and Demi Moore and
Same
Madonna
place.
and all that.
Same
But
place.
I knew there was something off on that. So it's this, just like they did with some of the Indian religions.
Right.
When that became popular, it was, and then people take advantage of that, right? As opposed to
Similar.
going to a real
Practitioners.
practitioner. Okay.
Any religion, okay? I'm not a master of all religions, but
No,
any
no, but
religion,
it's
if a
that
person's
thinking.
truly a religious person, no matter what the religion may be, means that they adhere to whatever the letter of their law may be and work hard to practice it, to be a practitioner.
Right.
It's not just the feel good stuff, it's not like a buffet. I'll take one of these, I don't like that, whatever it is. When it works for me, I go. It doesn't work, I don't go. That's not someone who's truly devout in whatever religion they may be.
So is that someone taking advantage for profit? I mean, I don't know what this Kabbalah Center is in
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
I'm not a master of the Kabbalah Center, but if somebody wants to study Kabbalah, I would not send them there. Okay? Make it simple.
I know we're going on, but I have a second question.
It must be the tequila.
Not yet.
Not yet?
That is excellent.
That'll be the third question.
Yeah. So I keep hearing it can be dangerous. And I've heard in the past. So how is it, how can it be dangerous?
Mentally, you can, let's put it this way, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, you can go nutty. Because you're trying to, one may be trying to practice things which have tremendous depth and profundity in them when done in a healthy fashion.
Okay.
Okay. If you don't know what you're doing, it's like anything. If you don't know what you're doing, you want to take, I'll give you an example, homeopathy. Okay, homeopathic medicine, which to a degree is really could be very poisonous to a person. They take the wrong dosages and the wrong thing, it could really do a lot of damage. But it's homeopathic. I mean, it's healthy. It's not full of synthetic drug, but that's not true. It can be tremendously beneficial if you're into homeopathy, but it has to be done properly. You need to go to a practitioner who knows the dosage, knows whatever prescription it may be. I'm just giving you one example. It could be anything. Okay, but otherwise, you just walked in off the street and you have no idea, you know nothing about homeopathy, and you walk to some homeopathic store, and I'll take one of these, one of those, and I'll take 3 of those pills today, 2 of these pills. It says feel good, I'll take those too. It can do tremendous damage.
Right.
It can be. So Kabbalah, it's not taking a pill. It becomes a mental issue.
Okay.
Okay, which is even actually more dangerous to a large degree. That's a lot harder to undo. When somebody gets, I'll give you an example, a cult. Okay, you might be old enough to remember those.
Yes,
Okay. So unfortunately, there were, I don't know, a disproportionate amount of Jews that joined the Moonies, the Harry Kishkas, you name it. They were part of it. Okay. Why? Is that healthy? They're not. They're brainwashed.
Right.
Okay. Literally brainwashed. I happen to know for a fact. I worked with them to some degree, trying to get them out. Okay. They were brainwashed. It's not healthy. But it sounds good. They promise you love, money for fathers, stamp out Satan, and all kinds of mantras, whatever it is in the movies. I don't know how much you know about what they did, what they didn't do. It all sounds good and fine. And they take somebody who's usually vulnerable at that time. That's how they get it in. Once they're in, you're brainwashed. Brainwashed means they're not thinking for themselves anymore. They're not a free thinking person. Studying Kabbalah, if it's not done properly, you can do the same thing to yourself. You no longer become a free thinking person. You allow something else to control you. Okay, the spirits are controlling me, or whatever. You look at, well, you're a crazy person, man. You need to get hospitalized or take meds. I don't know, but people can get to that degree. Studying Kabbalah is not meant to take you take yourself out of your own self-control. On the contrary, it's meant to strengthen your self-control, but not to lose it to something else. It's not like, yes, you give up your life to God. That's all true, but still, I do this as a free-thinking person. They can become in an unhealthy fashion.
Yeah,
becoming obsessed. So obsession can be very dangerous if it's not regulated in any way. Well, typically obsession is usually not a good thing in general.
Right.
Okay, so because you're supposed to do things in a certain order of things and become obsessed, then you lost control, basically. Can't stop. It's like an addict. Okay, someone becomes addicted to something, you can't stop. Well, don't do it. It doesn't help them. Okay? You can't just tell them stop, but they know they should stop, or maybe they know they should stop. But telling them to stop doesn't make them stop. So some do it on their own, some do it however they do it. I mean, everybody's got their own people. Centers nowadays you get stuff online. Listen, I understand the draw to it because yes, it is intriguing, and there's a tremendous amount of information and knowledge there. It all sounds good, which is true. But on the other hand, it needs to be done in a certain order of things.
Yeah.
So, all right, we learned something. That's why I come to learn something. All right, back to the top of page 222. She has now appeared in person. 222. The Tevez Oshem, I gotta try and finish this in a half hour, so work with me. The Tevez Oshem Amushol Chalav Hashem Chinis Tamdas. The description of this tendency of the flame and the soul as a nature is non-literal, referring to anything which is not a product of reasoning and logic. Familiar with the term anthropomorphic? This is like an anthropomorphic example, if you will, that of the fire and the soul, because the soul is ethereal, it's not physical. Well, we use physical words, physical demonstrations, or examples to give us some appreciation for what it is. Okay, section 2. Why your love could remain dormant. If all souls are naturally drawn to God, why doesn't everybody believe in Him? In the following section, Tanya will explain that certain conditions need to be met for the soul's properties to be available and manifest. At the same time, I just want to throw out the fact that Jews make lousy atheists. I said it. As much as you have it doesn't say that. You have self-proclaimed atheists, but Jews, as a rule, were lousy atheists. Those who call themselves atheists, agnostics, it's more of a lack of convenience or a lack of knowledge than anything else. All right. The soul, as we learned in chapter 18, the root of the soul's supra-rational intuition and faith is its component of Chochmah, in which the blessed infinite light of God is found. So you remember Chochmah, it's the first of the three intellectual properties. The soul is drawn powerfully to its source in God because the soul has Chochmah within it, wisdom. Chochmah acts as a window, allowing God's light into the soul. This is very important to remember that part. Okay, so Chochmah acts as a window, allowing God's light into the soul, like a window allows light into a room, offering a direct embodied experience of the infinite. But once that light has come into your soul through its window, if the light is to continue flowing through the rest of your psyche, you must make yourself a suitable receptacle for it. So you can have light coming into the room. So it enters the room, but if you put up a bunch of veils or spotlights in front of it, it's not going to continue illuminating the room like, quote unquote, the godliness, which would not continue to, in a sense, inspire the person if there's a blockage after it hits the Chochmah point and doesn't go down to Bina and Das, etc.
And garments.
And garments, right, correct. So this, and the following is a fundamental principle with all the forces of holiness. The fundamental principle is the forces of holiness are exclusively derived from Chochmah. So Chochmah is not merely a route or route to holiness, it is a route to holiness. Not just any route, it is the route to holiness. Anything holy that comes into you comes through your Chochmah. Everything in the universe that is sacred must flow from Chochmah. We find the Chochmah itself is actually referred to as supernal holiness, since it's the root of everything that's holy. Anything holy that comes into this world, into ourselves, comes down through Chochmah. Which, as we explained, because Chochmah's own identity is voided by the blessed infinite light present within it, so it doesn't really have its own independent entity, and it doesn't feel itself to be independent, an independent thing from God. Kanishkalel is mentioned above. You remember going back to the earlier parts of Tanya, we explained that the word Chochmah, wisdom, is made up of two words, koach ma. Chaf ches, you split it down the middle, and mem hey. What's koach ma mean? What's koach? Koach means strength. Like koach. Ma is what? Exactly. So it's which is referred to as the power of what. In other words, it's not something defined. It's what? I don't know what it is. I know it's powerful, but it's what? it's not something which has any definition yet until it comes down into the next level of Bina where that becomes a contemplative process.
And then what is also a word that opens you up because it opens up your curiosity and opens up you to different ideas
It's the first step.
because you're asking what.
Right. Essentially, it is the first step. It's a first flash of light, if you will. And then now I have to explore what that is. So the having defined holiness as the voiding of identity and ego and an openness to something higher than self, it follows that the counter force of holiness, which is klipa, which literally translates as a shell, is defined by the reverse. So Chochmah opens. So what would klipa do? Close, exactly. I'm towards the bottom of 223. This is a complete opposite of klipa and sitra achra. There is a holiness. It's a complete opposite of klipa and sitra achra, which produces souls of the nations of the world who are self-serving. Why? Because the tendency of Amrin, the tendency of klipa is to say only, give me, give me. Bahaliteni, as Esav said to Jacob, feed me. He knows, just give me. I'm not interested in giving anything back. Just give me, give me, give me, give me.
Does it stem from
It stems from the side of klipa. It comes from the side of unholiness. In other words, when a person becomes egotistical in general, what is this notion of give me, give me? Because if it's all about me, that's my ego, right? I only care about myself. I'm self-centered. Give me, give me, give me is coming from the side of unholiness. As the self-serving mentality is caused by the feeling on top of 224. It's caused by the feeling of ego and separateness from God, as stated above, which is the opposite of Chochmah's character. So therefore, it says the forces of Klipa are referred to as dead, in the words of the Zohar. Why? Because Chochmah gives life. Remember, anything holy comes through Chochmah. It gives life, as it states in Ecclesiastes. And the verse states from Job, they die without Chochmah. In other words, if you don't have Chochmah, they're like dead. There's no spiritual vitality coming into them. So life is a result of interconnectedness. You're only alive because your organs and limbs work together in a wondrous unity. If your arm, for example, would lose its blood supply and nervous connections to the rest of the body, you would die. Correct? Mm-hmm. So every single part of the body ultimately is connected to another part of the body. I mean, subsequently to the brain and the heart. But for example, since the heart is the organ that pumps blood through the entire body itself, if one limb stops receiving blood, if you will, or oxygen, what's going to happen? It's going to die. It becomes disconnected.
Or if you have a stroke that needs a nerve to die.
What's the example? Right. Well, that's because oxygen is not going to that part of the brain, etc. Did you have a question? Somebody?
I got a question about Chochmah and so this divine light. That's where it can come. That's where it starts. You said that's the beginning.
It comes through Chochmah.
So
it's the window. View it as a window into your soul.
So that window has to be open somehow, or
it is open.
Waiting. Why does it get stuck there? Why do we get?
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Perfect.
Okay, don't run away yet.
All right.
Okay, B'chein harashayim midway down to 24. B'chein harashayim similarly with B'sham are wicked people and sinners of Israel. Before a scenario arises where their dormant love is activated, when they are put to test to sanctify God's name, it means convert or die. Because until that point, they lack faith. Why? Since the component of Chochmah within the divine souls, which every soul has, which houses a spark of godliness from the blessed infinite light, is in a state of exile in their bodies. So it's there, it has to be there, but it's like exiled. So it's sort of like, I gave the example before, like the light comes in and then it gets blocked, it gets veiled. So the window's open, the light from God is coming in, right, the source of all holiness, and then I'm putting up curtains. Dark curtains, not to allow it to absorb itself into the rest of my intellectual faculties and emotive attributes and garments, etc.
And the person chooses to do that.
But it's a choice. Well, anytime when a person sins, right? But ultimately, when a person sins, that's invariably what they're doing. Mm-hmm. In reality, listen, if you call a spade, when a person sins, why do they? There's ego involved. Mm-hmm. It's like I want to do this. Now,
Yeah.
God doesn't want me to, but I want to do this.
Yeah.
That's ego, right? And if you want to be honest about it, that's what it boils down to. It's kind of a sobering thought, which 99.999% of the people in the world are guilty of, right? It's true.
Yes.
Okay, but I'm not in the mood of doing this. Again, who's not in the mood? I am not in the mood. My ego came right into play again.
Mhm.
The moment the I comes in, there's ego. Ego and God are basically diametrically opposed. You can't have both simultaneously. Person cannot be egotistical and godly simultaneously. Doesn't work. Why? Because to truly be a godly person means giving yourself over to God. My desires, which I otherwise want to do or don't want to do, I'm putting aside on behalf of Hashem, who told me this, don't do this, whatever it may be. So then my ego is now out to lunch or on vacation, as long as it lasts.
It says here that the animal soul is from Klipa, and it's in the heart of that chamber.
Correct.
Mhm.
But if the animal soul, where is the Klipa from?
Klipa
missed
is-
that.
Klipa is well, I'm going to get the, let me just, I'll
We're gonna
finish
get
reading
to
and I'll
that?
explain it, okay? So he says, so while the sinners of Israel do have a spark of God shining through the Chochmah in their souls, that does not necessarily mean that they will have faith in God to be drawn to his worship. The light remained blocked in exile. From the animal soul, which is from Klipa in the heart's left chamber, and that Klipa rules and dominates the bodies of Rishon. It's explained that the animal soul of the Jew specifically, comes from Klipas Noga. Remember, there's 4 different Klipas. There's the 3 Klipas of impurity, from which anything is absolutely forbidden comes from, non-kosher, whatever it may be, all rooted in that. And then you have Klipas Noga, which is an admixture of good and bad, mostly bad, but an admixture of good and bad. And if used out for the right purpose, it can be elevated to strictly goodness. That's the place that our animal souls, as Jews, comes from. So that's what he's talking about here.
Klipa Nova.
Klipas Noga comes from the Klipa, which resides. Where does the animal soul reside within the body? If you remember, in the left ventricle of the heart, which, just like physically speaking, it's the left side that pumps the blood throughout the rest of the body, vivifies the body, because it's your animal soul that has a desire to eat, to drink, to sleep. All your physical needs come from your animal soul. Your godly soul could care less whether you ate or drank. It has no interest. But to keep the body alive, you need this animal soul to in a sense, feed, your pardon the expression, but the animalistic desires that we have. In this case, I mean, the permitted ones, like eating, drinking, sleeping, procreating, anything like that, okay, all comes from that side. If done properly, so then you elevate them to Kedusha, to holiness. So in other words, that when I eat for the sake of being able to serve Hashem, I've taken that otherwise base desire or animalistic desire, and I've now transformed it into that of a godly pursuit. Right. All right. So we're at the bottom 224. While the Hasidic thought, while the opposite of good is evil, the opposite of holiness is a more subtle destructive force called ego. Ego is the opaque self, a misguided sense of self-importance that acts as a blockage to God's infinite light in your soul. If Chochmah is the window to your soul that allows God's light in, then ego is a thick curtain which blocks that light from your psyche.
There you
So if
go.
you want-
That's one for
answer
you.
your question?
Thank
There
you.
you go.
What is it?
The top of 225. So the egoic nature of Klipa inspires a self-serving mentality. If it succeeds, that sense of unhealthy self-importance will detach the person from the Chochmah in his soul, leaving the divine spark within Chochmah exiled and powerless within it. In other words, it's there, but it can't do anything. According to the secret of the Shechina, the divine presence, exile is mentioned above, Niskalel. As we explained, he says the exile of the Shechina, the divine presence, can be understood Kabbalistically as referring to the spark of God in Chochmah trapped inside a simple person. It's there, but it's not going anywhere. It's just like powerless. With this in mind, we can now appreciate why the presence of Chochmah in the soul can be responsible for a dormant love. Okay, how? Well,
It's always there.
exactly. Midway down 225. This is why this natural inherited love of the divine soul, whose will and desire is to connect with God, the blessed giver of life, is called dormant love, or hidden love, literally. Because it's hidden and covered by a sackcloth garment or of klipa, the place you saw in the case of the sinners of Israel. And it is from this klipa that a delusional spirit enters the wicked, the Rishayim, to incite them to sin. As our rabbis of blessed memory taught, a man will not commit a sin unless a delusional spirit enters him. If you remember, we discussed this earlier, but then the Talmud explains, why would a person sin? We understand that sinning, whenever we sin, we're in a sense distancing ourselves from God. It's like cutting off our connection to God. Would a person intentionally try to cut off, a healthy person, cut off their oxygen to breathe? No, but do whatever he can to breathe, right? God forbid a drowning person will grab at straw to keep him up because there's nothing else to do. So in essence, and we know that if you do certain things, it's going to cut off the oxygen. In essence, the same concept applies spiritually, that when a person sins, what happens? We're like cutting off our oxygen from God intentionally, if we're intentionally sinning.
Mhm.
So why would a person do that? Any free-thinking, normal person?
They want what they want.
The answer is because it says that a spirit of foolishness enters their mind.
Mhm.
They're not thinking clearly. If they thought clearly and recognized the repercussions of their actions, they'd never do that. But we don't.
It's more complicated than that because I think because you think clearly and then you go back to what you want. And then you
But then you weren't thinking
Then
clearly
you were
from the get-go. If you're a clear thinking, level-headed person, okay, and you thought through something well, are you gonna, and you know it's terrible, are you gonna do it anyway? Not if you're feeling normal in your head. I mean, if somebody's got other issues, that's a different story.
It's hard. It's
It's
temptation.
Hard it is,
Yeah.
100%.
Yes.
Hard, there's no
Temptation.
question it's hard.
Temptation.
It's tempting, it's hard, all true. But what ends up happening is that we convince ourselves
We
in our head, we
rationalize.
self-rationalize.
Yeah.
In my case, God will understand me.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's, the God will understand me. He may not understand you. Because if you did the same thing I did, then you should definitely get punished. I mean, a person
Yeah.
should burn in hell. That's terrible. If I did it, it's a different story. It was an extenuating circumstance. And we go through all the self-rationalization where it all becomes kosher.
I was a little mashugana at the moment.
Yeah, whatever it is. We all have great excuses.
Yeah.
Okay?
Kidding.
If only God did A, B, C, or D, it would never happen.
Yes.
If only.
Yeah.
Again, so, which implies that God doesn't know what he's doing. I know what I'm doing. But God apparently, he has no idea what he's doing.
And I'm
A
still
little bit
like,
of an ego.
No, not at all. I'm just stating the facts. It's nothing to do with me.
and then you hear people, all of us say, but I'm good. I'm a good person.
I've heard it plenty. Believe me.
Regardless.
I'm a good person. I'm a moral person. I'm an ethical person,
But I
etc.
did
But-
this and that.
Well, they forget that part.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, but it's a means of self-rationalizing, not
Yes.
doing certain things God wants them to do, or conversely, doing things they shouldn't do. Okay, according to Torah, but in their understanding of morality, ethics, what have you, goodness, they check all the boxes.
Yeah.
In their understanding, subjective to what they understand moral, ethical, good to be. Okay, so God apparently thinks differently, but we're entitled to our opinions. God can have his opinion, I have my opinion, like everything else, right? Section 3, Chochmah awakened. Having emphasized that the divine spark in Chochmah remains exiled and powerless in the sinners of Israel, Tanya now stresses that it is never extinguished. And that's the key.
That's the key.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
The foxhole.
It's always going to be there. El Shagala says that, exactly. El Shagala says of Chinas Chochmah. However, this exile of the soul's component of Chochmah, it is only true, top 226, of Chochmah's energizing influence on the rest of the soul. But the root and core of the divine soul's component of Chochmah remains untrapped in the brain. And does not actually become exiled and enmeshed in the sackcloth garment, garment of klipa in the heart's left chamber. So it's exiled, it's stuck, but ultimately it's there. But the difference is that it's not manifest in the person's garments and the like, doesn't come out. That's why it's concealed love.
We're just talking about Jews.
Yes. So the exiled an entity implies that anything is exiled. It's present in a certain location, right? It's exiled to whatever place it may be. And B, it's stripped of its power and forced into activities against its will. That's what the concept of exile. They're not free. It's not free to do what it wants. So the Tanya clarifies here that it is only Chochmah's energizing influence that remains both present and powerless. That's exile within the sinful part of the person, which is left side of the heart, your animal soul. The root and core of Chochmah, however, is located in a part of the body uncontaminated by klipa, which is the seat of the divine soul in the brain. That cannot become contaminated on that level.
Is that what we were talking about in early chapters of the root? That we have a root?
Correct. That's what it's
So
the
the
root.
Chochmah is the root,
It's Chochmah is the window
the window.
that brings everything in, that which was basically the root, the core essence of your soul. Therefore, it cannot be correct to say that the root and core of the Chochmah is exiled, since it's not present in a location of Klipa. It is merely dislocated from the rest of the body and unable to have any effect. So it's sort of like stuck in this Klipa. The Chochmah comes down the window. Okay, if godliness comes in, it gets surrounded by the Klipa, so it's stuck there. It's still there, and it's not contaminated. It's just exiled. It's not free to do what it wants. So there's a disconnect between this Chochmah and then the rest of the body. That's where your concealed love exists, up here. Every Jew has that latent concealed love up here, which cannot be contaminated, cannot be gotten rid of. It's always there. And the question is, how do I break open the klipa? When does that happen?
Go in the foxhole.
Well, not everybody intentionally wants to walk into a foxhole with bullets flying over their head. Okay,
Where is it? It's not a physical thing, so it's not
It's not. It's
located in any
metaphysical,
particular place
but
in
it's
the brain.
connected. No, I don't know that science would say it's in frontal lobe, back, whatever.
Yeah.
No.
But ultimately, because it's an intellectual concept, right, an intellectual faculty, it has to be in the brain. That's where all of your intellect takes place. So somewhere in the brain, albeit it may not have a physical defined spot, because it's a spiritual concept, which is manifest again within the physical brain. I'm sorry? I understand, but I don't know that, if you did an MRI of it, you're not going to find Chochmah. It's not like,
You're not gonna find the root.
Undefined.
Again,
Connection comes through there.
true, true.
To the divine.
So so there are parts, there are parts of Kabbalah beyond this chapter, and I'm not a master of that end of it, which describe various parts of the brain as to what happens scientifically, and also spiritually why they happen scientifically, because there's a spiritual counterpart. Like, for example, when you think deeply, when you want to think deeply about something, what do you usually do with your head? You go like this, right?
Yeah.
Why do you do that? But
Don't
your
wanna
head
get
goes downward.
distracted.
Why?
You want to go inward.
It's not.
Your
It's
head,
beyond that. It's
your
because
brain.
your memory part of your brain is over here. That's what's getting activated. When you want to remember something you can't remember, what do you usually do? Where do you look? People look up, right? Why are you looking up?
No,
People are, you're thinking about, let me, why do you do that? It's intuitive. People just say, let me think about that.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
Yeah.
Because it activates another part of the brain. So these are different positions in the brain that move, so to speak, either to remember something, to think deeply about something. So again, I'm not a neurologist. You can look this up. I mean,
Hundreds of years ago, right? How did they know? You said they talk about parts of the brain, but they didn't know that.
so they didn't know it from science, but they knew it from Torah.
Yeah. So
Because everything you'll find in science, in some way, shape, or form, is found somewhere in Torah and Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. It's all there. It
It's
predates
amazing.
science.
I mean, that's what's amazing. I know some of the stuff I was
Yochai
reading.
went in a cave and he had these.
Well, he wrote the Zohar, but
Yeah.
the reality is nothing exists in this universe, not just our planet, in the universe that in some way, shape, or form is not mentioned somewhere in Torah. You have to know where to look, how to find it. True, but it's all there, and it all predates any modern science that we have.
Right.
It wasn't written in scientific jargon as you'll know it today, perhaps,
Okay.
but notwithstanding, the concepts are still absolutely there.
They don't.
Not at
the
all.
ones that I-
No.
that I
If you
found
study
out.
them properly and understand, then they don't ultimately conflict. I mean, if you want to look at it through the lenses that science conflicts Torah, well, fine, you can do whatever you want. But in reality, it really doesn't. Okay?
This is so many views become science.
True, but many of those are my followers.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's what I'm
So
saying.
people
It's
had
very
trouble. Some people had trouble somehow, trying to figure out how can he be a respected physicist and yet a Hasidic Jew. In their minds, Torah and science are two different worlds. You know what I mean? So how come my father, who got his PhD in physics, they don't take you in that department for your good looks. He worked hard to get to where he was. Okay. And yet at the same time, he's a God-fearing Hasidic person with the whole nine. It didn't seem to drive in their brains. So my father worked very hard. I mean, we wrote about, he spoke about Torah and science, how invariably things can be enmeshed one with the next. Is it easy? Is it obvious? It's not always obvious when it comes to age of the world, you know? So do you want to say the world is millions, hundreds of millions, whatever, or the universe years old? Can't be proved. It's not, what do you call it? Empirical data. Okay, it's based on certain assumptions. This has to be like that, so that has to be like this. You're assuming that in their minds, 3 million years ago, the planet was exactly the way it is today, and the temperatures are all the same they are, and therefore the carbon 12 and 14, when it, we have radioactive. You're familiar with that at all?
Yes.
Carbon 12 day. Yeah. Okay, so things happen this way because today, when we observe, the half-life of something, radioactivity, etc., it behaves a certain way. We assume it's the same way 3 million, 5 million, 10 million years ago. Well, anybody that have from nowadays, I mean, if you believe in global warming, you don't. But, things are changing. This is on our own little lifetime, which is like a speck on, in the broad scheme.
And
So
when the science it comes closer to,
Yes.
they just didn't know enough about it. Now there's enmeshment. Everything's connected.
they are all interconnected. And if you look,
Entangled.
they're entangled. They're 100% entangled. They are 100%. So the closest, my understanding, the closest scientific theory to the creation of the world is like the Big Bang, although it's not exactly like Torah because they can't answer what happened, what caused the Big Bang. That only goes to a point. But as Torah just says, it was nothing, absolute nothingness before the world was created. It's not a nothingness that we relate to because there is no such thing as absolute nothingness in our universe. And you go like this, I say, what's in my hand? Nothing? Not nothing. Still the atoms, protons, neutrons, electrons, and probably enough bacteria to kill a horse. That's it is. You can't see it. Doesn't mean it's not there. But all right, let's move along here. Rakshihi. So what's the story now? Now that we know exactly where it is, rather with Rishon, with wicked people, it says if the Chochmah were asleep, failing to have an effect on them. Chochmah remains asleep in Rishon so long as their das and bina, their understanding and their knowledge are preoccupied with worldly pleasures. As he calls the Chochmah's inquiry, bina's cognition, and das recognition. Top of page 227. So when Rishayim, wicked people, are confronted with a test of life and death in a matter of faith, in other words, either convert or die, which transcends any logical considerations of das. And that test touches the soul directly, reaching its component of Chochmah. Because in reality, if someone's a wicked person, let him just tell the people what they want to hear. Worship whatever you want. I don't believe in it, but if it keeps me alive, who cares? But they didn't do that. The question is why? It's completely irrational, especially for somebody who was not an observing person. On the contrary, they were wicked in the eyes of Hashem. Then Chachma awakens from its sleep and does its work of arousing faith, using the power of God invested in it. As the verse states, then God awoke as one asleep. The power of God within the soul was aroused. This enables the person to succeed in a test of faith in God without using any of his reasoning, knowledge, or fathomable intellect. To prevail over the klipos and this worldly temptations to which he's been accustomed, whether they're permitted or prohibited, and to despise them, realizing now how they separate him from God. So ultimately, a person has the ability, even if they've been wicked for 60, 70, 80 years of their life, when they come to the recognition that this is really separating me from Hashem, I want to stop this, they have the ability to do it. Some people call it a midlife crisis. Well, when you're 80, you might be a little beyond midlife, but whatever. Okay, but why? It's always been there. It's always been in the Chochmah. It's always been, but it's been sort of encased in this klipa, this shell. And now I want to make sure I'm going to break it out of that shell to allow it to manifest itself in the rest of my body, in my psyche, etc. The Livka Lei Hashem B'Chalkei Garale, the arousal of Chochmah empowers them to choose God as his portion and his lot, to give up his life for God, to sanctify God's name rather than transgress. Even though the klipos have prevailed over him all of his life. And like an addict, he's been powerless against them. As our rabbis of Basmermi taught that the Rishaim, the wicked, are controlled by their hearts, which is the seat of passion and the like. But when it nevertheless, when it comes to an unambiguous test of his faith in the one God, a faith which even in Rishaim, wicked, has its foundations on the holy peaks. This referring to the divine soul's component of Chochmah, in which the blessed infinite light is present. Then, as soon as this Chochmah awakens, all the klippas are rendered null and void. So once you allow the Chochmah to burst through, basically washes everything out. Now, the Tanya is going to offer various verses to suggest this idea. Then it is though they have never been literally, since the klippas are voided in the presence of God that shines through Chachma. And he gives 4 verses here. As the verse states, all the wicked nations are like nothing before him. So that's one. Now from Isaiah, as it's written, for behold your enemies, O God. For behold, your enemies will perish. All evildoers will be scattered. Psalms, as it's written, as wax melts before fire, so will the wicked perish before God. And lastly, as it says in Psalms, mountains melt like wax before God. The uniqueness of the 4, or the allusion to the 4 verses in particular, is that the first 3 speak about destruction, perishing, etc., which refers to the 3 levels of impure klipa. That's like the deepest level of klipa, where things are absolutely forbidden. It's like the abyss of impurity. The 4th one, which speaks about melting, like mountains melt like wax, is klipas noiga, the admixture of good and bad. It doesn't talk about destroying it per se, or perishing, but melting. V'hinei aravaya, bottom of 228. V'hinei aravaya ain't seif baruch hamluvish b'chachmash b'nefesh. Now that the light of the blessed infinite one present in the soul's chachma, God Vatzim Keicha Kol Kach has such great, awesome power. The guy that it will expel and drive away the Sitra Achra and the Klippas even from touching the soul's garments, which are thought, speech, and action associated with the faith in the one God.
By saying this.
Okay. Well, not necessarily. This is saying the Shema helps to evoke this feeling of the monotheism, the oneness of Hashem, but it goes beyond that. I'm gonna try to finish this up. That is to say, an awakened Chachma will inspire a person to give up his life, even to save himself from doing a mere empty act that's contrary to faith in the one God. During the Shtach by such as bowing to an idol, even though in his heart he doesn't believe in it at all. Just going through the motions, right? That doesn't mean anything about doing it. If it's going to keep me alive, I'll do it anyway. Not idolatry. In public, anyway. It's one of the sins that a person has to die for. There's 3 sins that a person has to give up their life for. One of them is not to worship an idol. It's in public, specifically, in front of 10, like a minion, so to speak, of people. Then they have to give up their life. Another one's like to violate another woman. Notice that they threaten you, unless you violate this woman, we're going to kill you. So the same thing, a person has to give up their life. And lastly, to not kill another person, saying that we'll kill you unless you kill so-and-so. Then you also have to, one has to sacrifice their life. Those are 3 sins for which a person has to give up their life. Other than that, you're right. Everything else, it says, whatever it is. Yes, you can break the Shabbos, break Yom Kippur, whatever it is to save a life.
So when people were asked to forcibly convert.
So then, if it was then they had to give up their life, like you had it to Auto da Fe in Spain, and to the tune of millions. I mean, This is what he's referring to. Many of those people were not observant people necessarily, but yet they were willingly gave up their lives as opposed to converting to Christianity. In that case, it was Christianity. I mean, whatever religion it may be.
So what about the ones that funded to
So
convert.
that-
but
So that became a very hot topic.
Yes.
Called them conversos. Okay, and another word for them was the Moranos, but it's a derogatory term. What does Morano? It means fake. It's not a flattering term, but they were known as Moranos because that's how they were looked at by many other Jews. That you didn't die like you should have, like everyone else did, and you went through the motions to placate whatever it was, the church at the time, or
The idols.
right. I mean, listen, far be it for me to judge anybody, but
Mm.
they weren't looked at in a good light. Yeah, but the
Yeah,
term was
the term
it's
came
a
from
derogatory term.
maybe
No, the
you know,
Moranos.
Jew.
Listen,
Yeah.
when Hitler got killed Jews, he didn't care whether they're religious or not.
No,
Right.
but I mean,
He
people
didn't-
pretending.
They tried again, but that's different than converting to a different religion. It's not the same thing.
Okay.
It's not like dressing up like a German, you know what I mean, or whatever it is, going
No,
through the motions. That's different than converting
So what happened?
literally.
Okay.
When the Inquisition was literally an option. Right.
But how could the other Jews be calling them out? They're alive.
Well,
Because
there
that means
were
they
other
didn't die.
Jews that escaped or left,
Oh,
expelled. My own ancestors were expelled from Spain.
right.
So my
Okay.
family originally
That's
came,
right.
my father's side came from. They
Yeah,
got kicked
no.
out, they ended up in Greece. Exactly. So the Lishtachis Avodah Zarah, L'daber Torah Chashem L'Achzus Hashem. So likewise, he'll be willing to give up his life to avoid verbally attesting to a mistruth about God's unity. God forbid, even though his mouth would not be consistent with his heart. His heart remaining completely faithful to God. In other words, in order for something to be real, it has to have intent, right? So you said, well, they didn't intend it. I mean, they just went through the motions to keep someone else happy. But even that people didn't do. And we're not talking about the religious, ultra, whatever it is. These are people who were either irreligious or sinners. But still, when it came down to that's a line they wouldn't cross. Why? Because what existed within them, like any other Jew, was concealed love of God. And then it burst through. At that moment, under that test, it burst through the klipa. Even they were even in their life, that level of chochmah came through. It
No,
exists.
I mean, there are people who say they're atheists, but they're Jewish because
Yeah, okay.
they were born and raised Jewish, but they never say they're just completely atheists. They always.
As I said, Jews make lousy atheists.
That's what I understood when you said that. 'Cause I thought, yeah, you.
They're not good at it. They're not. I've spoken to enough people, Jews, who say they're atheists.
And if they were called on it, like in
They
Hitler's
don't
time,
do
I think
well.
they would still say they were.
They don't do well with being exactly. It's okay. I want to just finish it. We can talk about it for a long time, but I don't want to get in trouble with my wife here. And this willingness to die for God as a result of awakened Chochmah is called reverence that is contained in love. This is where the reverence comes in. That you have a reverence for God that's contained within the dormant love. Because God is so powerful, and I feel, in a sense, absolute reverence in front of him, I'm willing to give my life up for, either the convert or die option. You saw this love comes naturally to the divine soul found in all Israel, every Jew. Since its innate desire and will is to be attached to its root and source, the blessed infinite light. And as a result of this love and will, the soul has a natural aversion to and trepidation of even the slightest association with the impurity of idol worship, God forbid, which is in conflict with the faith in one God. And as we have seen that this is even where the association with idol worship only involves the soul's outer garments of speech or action. And if they go through the motions without any faith whatsoever in the heart, but still in all are willing to give up their lives on this account. Sorry, I rambled through the last part there, but that was chapter 19 in a nutshell. There's a lot there. What? Well, I can't compete with bacon challah, so I mean, I know where I stand. Anyway, those on Zoom, have a good night. Buenas noches. Till next Thursday, at least for the class.
Thank you, Rabbi.